Welcome back to Get Down to Business. I'm joined by a leadership speaker, advisor, and author who has spent more than 40 years across the transportation, technology, and real estate sectors. Greg Hoover spent over 2 decades in the C-suite as a CEO, president, and COO before founding Third Star Consulting to help organizations rethink the very definition of authority. He's the author of Lead Anyway, Ordinary You, Extraordinary Impact. And Greg believes that leadership has nothing to do with your title and everything to do with the influence you choose to create from day one. He's here to show us how to close the leadership gap and empower every level of an organization. Welcome to the show, Greg.
Thanks, Shalom. It's terrific to be here. I appreciate having the opportunity today.
Absolutely. Homecoming of sorts for you in Chicago. You spent over 20 years in C-suite roles like CEO and COO. What was the specific inflection point in your executive career where you realized that the most impactful leaders in the building often didn't have the biggest titles?
Well, my background, my management career has always been kind of informed by athletics and how sports teams work. And early on, a great Chicago metaphor, is it easier to get an extra 2 or 3 points from Michael Jordan or an extra 15 points from the bench? And so early on, I realized if you want to really grow the organization, be efficient, be effective, be profitable, you need to grow downstream and get more people permission to lead, permission to make decisions, and the opportunity to exercise their skills.
Powerful. So what does Lead Anyway practically look like in practice for someone who's maybe perhaps their first week on the job?
Sure. Well, the principle is that regardless of your title or role, every one of us has opportunity to lead and has an impact circle, I like to call it. We have a circle of influence, people that we interact with or that we have the opportunity to help. And in a lot of ways in the book, I talk a lot about kindness and empathy. It's hard for me to imagine that you can lead without being from an empathetic position and understanding where people are coming from. And so everybody has that opportunity. If you hold the door for somebody going into a restaurant, you're leading, you're being kind to them in that moment, and you're building them up. If you have conversation with somebody, if you make eye contact, if you speak. And so the point is that everybody, from the CEO on down, has an opportunity to make an impact in their world. And it's kind of through some common sense and taking action and being active in your environment.
I couldn't agree more. You mentioned that ordinary individuals create extraordinary impact. Would you mind sharing the story of an ordinary professional you coached who changed the trajectory of their company simply by changing their mindset?
Yeah, I think, and it's not just the trajectory of the company, but I could list a dozen examples of people that have changed their lives and career, just by taking action. And the metaphor that I like to talk about is what is lead anyway? Well, a guy who's leading anyway, or a gal who's leading anyway, is the person that sees a fire and doesn't just wait for the fire truck to show up. They look for a hose. And there's examples throughout my career of people that you see, and they're capable of more, and that they have the ability to impact not just their career, but your company. And so you just give them the opportunity, and again, in a sports metaphor, it'd be, playing that 7th or 8th person down the bench that maybe if they get the opportunity to play and get some direction and clarity about their role, then they can make a difference. And I just think there's examples of that throughout, not just business, but, sports and society as well.
Powerful. We talk about stewardship of values all the time on the show. I've been mentioning this to every one of our guests today. How does a leader use communication as their first act to set the tone for an entire organization's culture?
Well, the first thing, and I think unfortunately, people in titled roles of leadership, I think one of the first things or first mistakes that we find is we as leaders may think that everybody knows the plan, right? Knows what the game plan is, what the goal is, what the method that we're going to use to get there. And the reality is, most times when you have a breakdown in an organization, it's about lack of clarity or lack of alignment. People don't understand what's really expected of them. What does success look like? What does success mean? What's my role and what do I play in that? And throughout my career, I'm a big believer in simpler is better. And I'd rather execute at an 80% level fully than spend all my time trying to get, to 100% and execute perfectly. And I think that's, as a leader, our role is to communicate and make sure that everybody's on the same page and understands the game plan.
We're going to have to cut to a break in just about a minute, but you talk a lot about a leadership gap inside, frankly, most organizations. Is this a failure of the people at the bottom for not stepping up, or the people at the top for not letting go?
Yeah, I think to me, it's a failure at the top, because most people are going to wait for direction unless they know they've got permission to take action. And, companies, whether consciously or not, build environments where people are afraid to step up, where they may not be rewarded for taking action or making decisions or positively impacting the organization. And obviously that comes with mistakes, right? There's going to be times when things happen that don't flow the way business should go. But I think it starts at the top. You've got to give people the strength or the courage or the confidence that they can take action, and that you support that kind of behavior.
And lastly, you spent over 20 years as a CEO, president, and COO in high stakes industries. When you look back at all your notebooks or your own equivalent of a leadership journal, was there one ordinary decision you made early on that unexpectedly became the foundation for your lead anyway mindset?
I think it's just simplicity in action. My dad passed away when I was a kid, but he was a very type A engineer, and he taught me simple is always better.
Powerful. And I love that name, Third Star. In the context of a 40-year career across transportation, logistics, and real estate, what's the story behind that name, and how does it represent that specific extraordinary impact you want to help ordinary professionals achieve?
Yeah, I have to be honest. I don't know where the inspiration came from, but I know what it means. And three stars, somewhere along the way, a long time ago, I read that 3 stars are symbolic of success in your career, your life, and your overall achievements. And I think for me personally, it kind of represented a third tier of my career. There was the learning career, there was the 2+ decades when I was a leader in corporate world, and this is kind of the third act. So it kind of represents both of those things for me.
Cool. I like it. And in your work, Greg, you address the intersection of personal wellness and professional performance. How does a leader's mental and emotional health, including their personal intimacy, impact their ability to lead with clarity and presence?
Well, all of us, right? Whether you're an athlete, a student, a family member at home, or a leader or person in your place of employment, how your mindset has everything to do with how you perform, right? If you have confidence, if you're feeling positive about yourself and your contributions. And so I think to me, it's a very holistic approach. I think you have to be coming from a position of working from your best self and contributing at your best level. And I think, and it's a wheel too, right? The more that you contribute and the better you contribute and the better you do, the more you feel good about yourself and the better your contribution gets. So I think it's all interrelated, and I really don't think you can keep those things separate.
Yeah. And lastly, why do you think we are culturally hardwired to believe that leadership requires a title? And how do we deprogram that in a traditional corporate environment?
Well, it's interesting because you think about that a lot. And I don't know. I don't think it used to be that way. I think a lot about when I was a kid, and, parents would look out for kids or give what I would call leadership to children in their community or in their church or in their, neighborhood. And somewhere along the way, and I don't know how or when that happened, but we just got away from that, and kind of an approach of what I would call accountability or responsibility. And, I've got a responsibility to my community to make things better. And I think, quite honestly, particularly in the workplace, but again, throughout all of those applications, I think it's just by giving people the freedom to act, right? Support people who take action, whether they're right or whether they're wrong. You might correct, you might coach, you might lead and guide them to a better response. But we've got to get people back to where they're willing to take action and willing to step in and make things better, and not afraid to sit back and not have confidence to take that step.
I love it. We've been chatting with Greg Hoover, founder of Third Star Consulting, author of Lead Anyway, Ordinary You, Extraordinary Impact. And Greg, I'm really curious, how can we find the book? And I guess what's the advice that you want to leave our listeners with that they should, maybe the first lead anyway move that they should make this week?
Well, the first, I think, is just to be conscious of your impact. No matter who you are, no matter where you're at, no matter what you do, you have an opportunity to lead and make things around you better. And that comes by being decisive and taking action. And so whether that's interacting with people, whether it's an act of kindness, just be cognizant that you through the things you do have an opportunity to impact and make a difference. The book is available on Amazon.com. Lead Anyway, Ordinary You, Extraordinary Impact. And I'm currently doing some workshop work. And if anybody's interested in improving their skills and kind of getting into some of the basics of how they can change their impact level, leadanywaylive.com is where I've got some workshops out there that are available.
Amazing. Greg Hoover, thank you so much. We'll link in the show notes. Great show today. Of course, we're wrapping up with Greg Hoover, but some great guests. We'll link to all of them in the show notes at syklein.com or on your favorite podcast path to success. Let's get down to business. We'll see you next week.